Hello, hello, Team PYP. Welcome to today's episode of the Play Your Position podcast. I am solo today, and as the title of this episode suggests, I'm going to be talking about a topic that we often don't address in podcasts, and we certainly don't address it collectively as a culture unless you've tuned into the nightly news and there's some extreme example of death. But here in New York, there's death reported every single night, and we've come to a point, I think, collectively where we just tune it out. The only time it affects us is when it's immediate to our lives, and I'm going to be talking about that. But before I jump into today's content, I just wanted to give you a heads up about some of the amazing conversations that are set to drop this summer. It is the end of June 2023, and I'm going into my recording hiatus that I do every single year. And it's great because I get a break, which we all need, especially during the summer months when we have the most light here in the Northern Hemisphere, and we can get away for true vacation, do some deep reflection, do some reading, spend time with family, get by blue spaces like lakes, rivers, oceans, get to the mountains, camping, away from crowds, whatever it is you've got on tap. I hope that you have something planned. And, taking some podcasts with you is not a bad idea. I mean, I'm constantly listening to things and find inspiration no matter if I'm working or I'm on vacation. And especially when I'm on vacation, I like to tune into the stories of other people to keep me thinking about what matters to me, to learn new things. And here at PYP, I am committed to bringing you great content consistently so you can continue your self-leadership development practice. You can actually meet new people and reach out to them and build your network. There's all kinds of great reasons to tune into this podcast as well as others that you may enjoy. So I want to give you that little bit of a teaser that the conversations that are going to drop in the next couple of months are dynamic, exciting, fun-filled, deep, all the good stuff, and you'll definitely walk away from each one with at least one new insight about what it means to be a leader in today's complex and incredibly rich and exciting world. So, not going to mince words. It's not always easy, which brings me around to today's topic, death and the leader. Yeah, death and the leader. And I'm going to start with my own personal story. If you've been listening to this show for any length of time, you know that my dad died unexpectedly at the end of November in 2021. We were still technically in the COVID-19 pandemic, but here in New York, the mask mandate had been lifted for a lot of things, not everything. Still, healthcare facilities like hospitals and doctors' offices and dentists and things like that required masks. But generally speaking, at that point, it felt like we were coming out of what was really a crazy, chaotic, uncertain, confusing, also blessing-filled time in a weird way. I mean, I've had a lot of conversations since the pandemic with people who say their businesses grew. They were able to pursue a creative project. They were able to let go of something that no longer meant anything to them. So with the bad comes the good, and with the good comes the bad. And, losing my dad was definitely not good. And yet losing my dad opened up for me an entirely new set of circumstances that have really made me grow as a leader in ways I wouldn't have any other way. I mean, I'm just going to put it to you that way. And I recently was having a conversation with a dear friend of mine, and you know who you are because you're listening to this. I'm not going to name names, but she knows who she is. And she was recently down in New Orleans with her father, who has had some challenges medically and health-wise. And many of us are in that space in our lives where not only do we have children, perhaps still at home, or just launching children into the world of college or the armed forces or just into the world of work, but we're also faced with helping out our aging parents. And it is a growing population that we, again, collectively avoid discussing in American culture because I think because we're so youth obsessed here. Everything is about being 18 or 21. And, between you and me, yeah, those years were great, but I don't have any interest in going back to how naive I was, how unsure of what I was going to be doing with my life. I mean, I love the wisdom that comes with experience, with aging, with another birthday candle on the cake. I'm proud to be where I'm at in life because I've got a huge amount of life experience that I can draw on. And things don't bother me like they used to. And I don't stress out about things that I used to stress out about when I was younger. And, one of my commitments to the world is to be a guide to people who are figuring things out. And in all fairness, I'm still figuring things out. You don't get to a certain point and you're like, okay, I've got it all. I'm just going to ride it out from here. It doesn't work that way. And it certainly didn't work that way for my dad, and all the signs in hindsight, and going through his things, it was like he was here one day and then he wasn't. So the life that he was leading was in the middle of that life when my mother and I, my brother and other family members started going through the stuff he left behind. And, death in the leader is an interesting thing because if you go on Amazon and you type in that phrase, death in the leader, what comes up are books about a leader dying, a world leader dying, or in some of these graphic novels, the main character dies. But there's really not a whole lot about how when you are a leader in your life, whether you're running a business, you have a family, you have both, you are leading at the workplace. For those of you who listening who are employed somewhere, I approach my life from the standpoint of I am a leader. I've been a leader. I was molded into a leader from childhood. Both of my parents were leaders in their respective industries, education and nonprofit world. My mother was a Girl Scout leader. She was my Girl Scout leader. My father was a Boy Scout leader. He was my brother's Boy Scout leader. I became a leader of different things during school. I became a leader in education. I was a teacher. I became a business leader in my community. And I consider myself a leader in the podcasting space and also in the writing and publishing space. I'm a leader of my life. I look at each day, how am I going to take care of myself so that I can show up and serve the people who matter most to me in my life? And that includes you, Team PYP. I want to be my best so that when I sit behind the mic each time I have a conversation with a guest or I record one of these solo shows, I want to be able to bring to you the best of my thoughts, my full attention, my listening skills, and I want to also be a beacon in the dark. In a conversation you're going to hear later this summer with a guest, his name is Richard Newman, and Richard and I were talking about how there's such a widespread hunger right now for inspiration, for somebody to come along and shine the light into the darkness and say, here's the path. Okay, now we each have to walk that path alone. We each have to decide to walk that path. But when we can find people who are willing to shine their light to help us get farther along on that path, that's a win. And that's one of the things I stand for here at the Play Your Position podcast, and I stand for that in my life as well. So when my dad died, I was suddenly faced with what every child who loses their first parent or guardian, as the case may be, is faced with. And that is a boatload of questions about what happens next. And so there's a lot of initial chaos and activity around answering that question. There are the details of going through things. There are the legal details. There are the arrangements. There are who's going to come in from out of town and what are we going to do exactly and when. And, there's all this kind of flurry of activity. And eventually that dies down. And you're left with this space of, wow, this person who has played a significant role in my life is no longer here. And it could be, again, the loss of a parent. It could be the loss of a child, God forbid, but it happens. It could be the loss of a very good friend. I remember in my early days of podcasting, I had a conversation with a man named Dan Caldwell. Now, you might not know that name, but he was one of the founders of the Tap Out brand, which was all really elevated the MMA world back in the day. And he did very well with that brand. But he lost his best friend and co-founder to a tragic car accident. And he talks openly about the effect that had on him as a business leader. And he was faced with wondering, do I continue? And that's a very common question that in the face of death, we find ourselves asking, how do I continue on this path? Well, first of all, the path is forever changed. I mean, that's a given. But in the midst of our initial grieving, it's hard to have clarity about that. And it feels like the world has stopped. It feels like what you thought would always be there, now it's no longer there. And you're really left flailing about emotionally, psychologically, and sometimes physically, because as in the case of my dad, he was a collector of all kinds of things and he loved so many things, which means he had a lot. And here I am, I don't know, what am I, 20 months into that? And I'm still, with my mother's help and my brother's help, we are still sifting and sorting through a lifetime of interests of his. And it takes time and it takes energy and it's emotional. And I find myself at times being triggered by, I find something random, like a note he wrote to himself in 1983 about a call he had with, some electrician. I mean, as random as that sounds. And I find myself, tears welling up in my eyes and this wave of memories. And again, it's like a punch in the face. Yeah, Dad's gone. And, death, we're all headed there, right? I know that's direct, but we all share that in common. Okay. And none of us knows when it's going to happen to us. And so part of fully living is being aware that there is an end date. And one of the things that I admire to this day about my dad is he did live life fully. He did what Thoreau talks about in Walden when he says the line, basically, you got to suck the marrow out of life. And my dad did that. He was so in tune with so many things. And losing him and the way that he saw the world created an empty space for not just me, but certainly my mom, who he left behind, and my brother and his grandchildren and former colleagues and people at church. So death in the leader is a real thing. And it can be a literal death, like a person no longer being with us, and it can be the death of a business, when we see businesses fold, when, again, on the nightly news, if you're somebody who watches the nightly news or you follow stories on social media about different things, and you see a story of a business that's closing its doors. Most recent one I can think of is Bed Bath & Beyond. Bed Bath & Beyond was a big part of a lot of people's lives. It was the place you knew you could go to get a new set of sheets. You could go redo your bedroom with a whole new comforter set. You could pick up a really cool gift for somebody, a kitchen gadget. I mean, it was a place that in the community you could count on. Well, they're gone now. Another one that went down a few years ago, I remember, was Pier 1 Imports. Man, I loved Pier 1 Imports, and I had to grieve the loss of being able to go into that showroom where I could get inspiration for my home, because I'm a big fan of decorating and I love to rearrange furniture and visualize what to do with rooms. So when Pier 1 Imports went down in terms of physical locations and became exclusively online, that was a real death. And it may sound trivial to some of you, but I'm going to stand behind when we are faced with a death of something and the way something was is now no longer going to be how it is. What do we do? So I want to leave you with a few insights that I've picked up in the wake of my dad dying and how it has impacted my leadership as just a regular citizen, as an everyday person who's living her life, and as somebody who shows up to the mic regularly and also to the written word. I'm big into, as you know, the spoken word and the written word. So what has helped me? Well, number one is accepting that death is inevitable. Okay, I know it sounds so simplistic. You might be going, yeah, the 5 stages or the 7 stages of grief. The first one is denial that it didn't happen, and eventually you end up at acceptance. But the faster we can get to accepting something has happened and things are no longer going to be the way they were, the faster we can get on with sucking all the marrow out of life, right? Really living fully. That's not to dismiss the grieving process. I think you can accept the death of something and still experience and process grief without even more loss. I think that's what I'm getting at, is preventing even more loss of time, loss of mindset, all those games that we can play with ourselves in our minds, telling ourselves stories and the what ifs and the shoulda, coulda, wouldas and all that nonsense. That, again, it's part of the grieving process. It's part of getting to that acceptance point. But yeah, accepting that reality. A second thing is remembering to put yourself first. Okay? It's not selfish. In fact, it's imperative, because if we don't take care of number one, nobody else is going to get anything from us, right? Or we're going to end up just a big bag of resentment because we feel like we're constantly giving to everyone else and not feeding what we need to feed ourselves. And that can look like so many things. And I'm not talking about escapism here. I am not talking about running away through all the different ways that are so easy to run away now. Scrolling social media is one. Overeating is another. Overspending, just going in and blindly buying stuff for the sake of, again, not having to feel, right? Taking care of ourselves means acknowledging what we're feeling and then doing healthier activities. Listen to some music, call a friend, write a friend a letter, send a friend a text, journal, take a nap, go get a massage, go get acupuncture, one of my favorite things. And I have someone in my life who is instrumental to that, who listens to this show. Hi, Shannon. Thank you so much for your service to me and so many other people. Um, yeah, self-care has become a buzzword. It's become the hashtag self-care, and there's a reason for that. It matters. And as leaders, it is, I'm going to say it again, imperative, imperative, imperative. And in the wake of a death of any kind, and certainly there are degrees of loss, um, not losing sight of, you in that is so, so critical. One of the things that I do if I don't have access to a pen and some paper is I use the voice memo app on my iPhone. And I'm telling you, this thing is great. I can't tell you, I can't tell you how many recordings I have in there since my dad died where I'm just ranting. I'm just processing my feelings. I'll be driving, doing errands, whatever. Let's open that thing up and I'll start talking. And there is such a cathartic, it's a catharsis. I'm getting rid of these pent up emotions, and it's something I can go back and revisit if I want to. If I want to, I can also send the file to myself and get it transcribed, and then I might create some content out of it, like a blog post or a poem or a podcast here. Now, today I'm just talking. This has been on my mind for a while. This is an episode I've been wanting to make for a while because in the conversations I've had this year specifically, I've noticed some patterns around how people address the challenges that we all face from time to time and what that means when you've chosen to answer the call to leadership. That's what this show ultimately is all about, is what happens when we decide intentionally to answer the call to leadership. Not be an accidental leader, not just wake up one day and go, oh my gosh, I'm leading, but to really sit back and say, yeah, I own the fact that I am a leader. What does that mean exactly? And my conversations are designed to give you and, by default, me, these amazing insights into all the different ways that we can make our lives successful. What's successful to one is not to another, and vice versa. And at the end of the day, it's okay. That's one of the things I love about life, is that it's not black and white. It's not cut and dry. There are certain things that are, like math. You can't argue with math. But there are theories within the scientific community that are more open-ended because there's, I think, a really cool blend in the life experience between the absolute, the certainty, like 1 + 1 = 2, and the unknown, where there's a lot of mystery, some magic, timing and luck, and all that stuff. When you read stories of people who've made it big, leaders will talk about from the stage how they built and then exited from some company and made $1 gazillion or whatnot. And almost always, always they will say some of it was timing and luck. And you can't engineer those. You just can't. Just like we can't engineer, as much as we'd like to, knowing when or whereabouts we're no longer going to be here. Which is why, as I come to an end here on this conversation with you, take the time today, tomorrow, this week, to think about how are you addressing loss in your life. If you have recently experienced a death of any kind, what are you doing to make sure that you're taken care of, whether it's through a healthy outlet, like I just listed before, or it's reaching out to friends, family, professional help. Take care of you. So, so very important. And also, I think, honor the fact that with death comes birth. With death comes new beginnings. With death comes an opportunity to create something you didn't know was possible before. And I think that's the bittersweet part of death, is those of us who stick around after a loss have the choice to stay in the space of, well, I guess there's nothing else I can do here, or choose to use the experience for personal growth, for creating something that helps others, for stepping up our own game, whatever that game may be, reevaluating where we're at, where we want to go next, spending some time acknowledging what's great about being here now. These are all things that can really add value to our path, to our journey. So that is Death and the Leader today. I hope that this helped you in some way, helped you think about where you're at right now and what you're facing, whatever challenges are there. Remember, you are a leader and you can continue to show up, but you don't have to do it all, and you certainly don't have to do it all by yourself. There are plenty of people out there who are more than willing to step in and give you a hand. In closing, I want to remind you that my latest book, The Far Unlit Unknown, is currently available everywhere books are sold, and a lot of people have found this book to be very helpful in addressing the harder emotions like grief, like having to move forward after leaving something behind. And I'm excited that it recently launched on Audible. So for those of you who love listening, and if you're listening to this, you love listening, go over to Audible and get yourself the audio copy. You will hear me reading each poem, and there's also some exclusive content in the audio version that you can't get in the print version. So I appreciate your support. I love that you continue to show up, not only for yourself, but for the world as well. This is Mary Lou Kaiser. Thanks so much for listening. We will see you again next time. Make it a great day, everyone.